Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The Conservative leadership contender Boris Johnson has denied he was prevented from accessing secret intelligence when he was Foreign Secretary. The BBC understands from multiple sources that Downing Street tried to withhold some of the most sensitive security information from Mr Johnson amid concerns about a lack of discipline on his part. Number 10 has declined to comment. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt are in Scotland this evening ahead of party hustings in Perth. Both men have promised to protect the union while delivering Brexit. But Nicola Sturgeon says Scotland is heading towards independence regardless of who wins the contest. Our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, has been speaking to Tory party members and sent this report from Perth.
Tory activists need to work hard in Perth. They lost this seat by just 21 votes at the last general election. But which potential leader could deliver victory next time?
I don't think that Boris has got the gravitas or the attention span to deal with all the serious issues that are facing our country at this point in time.
I'm going to be voting for Boris. We need somebody who believed and believes in Brexit in order to deliver Brexit.
At the moment, I consider Boris to be the best candidate for the job.
I think Jeremy Hunt's definitely the best candidate to keep the union. It's quite clear on doorsteps that people that usually vote Conservative will be put off if it's Boris Johnson that's leader.
Jeremy Hunt arrived in Scotland with promises to support the green energy sector and boost whisky exports, saying he can deliver a Brexit that keeps the UK united.
The reason was because I want a Brexit that works for the union. I'm a passionate and committed unionist.
Boris Johnson took a tour of BAE Systems in Glasgow. He says he's convinced that delivering Brexit properly could strengthen the union.
I think that actually what will happen is that once we've done a sensible, pragmatic Brexit, what will happen is that the whole UK, the awesome foursome, all four nations will come together, Scotland and the rest.
Hunting with foxhounds may prove popular at the Scottish Game Fair, but it's not how people will choose their candidate.
I hate to say it, but probably Boris.
Why?
Oh gosh, I don't know, because he has more personality, I think.
The Tories in Scotland have enjoyed something of a resurgence in recent years. They need a new leader who won't do anything to reverse those gains. Their top priority is a leader who won't increase support for Scottish independence.
Boris Johnson would be more likely to lead to an independent Scotland in the shorter term.
Why?
Just because he is rather outspoken, and to a certain extent he's the antithesis of what people in Scotland are looking for as a politician.
I think Boris is not popular in Scotland.
Why is that?
Why is that?
Why is Boris
not popular in Scotland?
I think he's too flippant. I don't think he's serious enough for the Scots. He's not down to earth enough.
Some polling evidence does suggest that Scottish voters may be more likely to support independence if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister. Both candidates will be questioned in detail on their Scottish policies in the next couple of hours. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Perth.
Boris Johnson has denied suggestions that security chiefs kept top-secret information from him when he was Foreign Secretary. Speaking at a Tory leadership hustings in Darlington, he said the reports were simply not true. But the question that perhaps seemed to stump the frontrunner was when he was asked whether he had ever set aside self-interest for the benefit of the country. Paul McNamara reports.
You're a security risk, Mr Johnson.
Back when he was Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson was responsible for signing off an intelligence gathering and ultimately the boss of MI6.
Why is Number 10 so worried about trusting you with the nation's secrets?
But now it's been reported the Prime Minister tried to block Mr Johnson from seeing sensitive intelligence for fear of it leaking.
Ladies and gentlemen, Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much.
Today, as he campaigned in Darlington to become the man who leads the nation, it was the first question he faced.
Well, it's not true, but I obviously can't comment any further on intelligence matters.
It seems reports suggest that the order itself came from Theresa May over fears that you couldn't be trusted.
I'm sure that the Prime Minister will not comment on intelligence matters either, so I'm extremely dubious about the provenance of this story.
Whitehall sources told Channel 4 News it's the Prime Minister that makes the ultimate decisions on intelligence sharing And Theresa May, who trusted him with the job in the first place, is naturally cautious. Security Minister Ben Wallace suggested the story was an attempt to undermine the Johnson campaign, calling it total tosh. No minister, cabinet or junior sees all intelligence, he said, adding, attendance at sensitive meetings is always a matter for the Prime Minister and will be tailored to the subject. Those briefing these stories know little. Playing petty politics with intelligence dishonours the professionals who serve their political masters, irrespective of what party they are from. The man who has the job now, and Boris Johnson's leadership rival, didn't want to be drawn on intelligence matters either.
We do have a rule that we never comment on intelligence matters, and that would include...
You're seeing everything.
Hannah, that would include comments about my predecessor and comments about myself.
But some have questioned the timing of this story, coming just as postal ballot papers land on the doorsteps of Tory party members.
Okay.
Miss Hunt, did this story come from your camp?
Hello, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Hello. I don't know which story you're talking about.
About Mr. Johnson not being trusted with security secrets.
Absolutely not.
State secrets aside, there was one other question that Mr. Johnson seemed to find awkward today.
Can you give an example in your political life when you've set your own self-interest aside for the benefit of the country?
Well, it's a good question, but I would, I don't. Obviously, it's embarrassing, but true. But that it is obviously possible. How should I put this? To make more money by not being a full-time politician.
Mr. Johnson currently earns £79,000 as an MP, £275,000 a year for a weekly newspaper column, and tens of thousands for private speeches. So after today, does the audience here think the frontrunner has the integrity to lead the nation?
Yes, I think he could be trusted. I think, he's got a good record in London. I think he could be trusted, but for me, the one that, edged it in terms of trust is Jeremy.
Yes, absolutely. I think he's got a good team around him and I think he'll make an excellent Prime Minister.
Do you think Boris Johnson can be trusted?
Well, I think so. Yeah.
You don't sound convinced.
No.
With postal voting underway, Conservative Party members are now deciding who they trust, a decision they make on behalf of the entire nation. One announcement Boris Johnson made today that seemed to please people here in the North East was that he backs a report released today to make the plans to make the local port and 5 others around the country free ports. That's an area where tariffs don't apply, so goods can be imported, stored and then re-exported without the taxman getting involved. That could be possible after Brexit and could attract millions in investment. One of the ports, though, is Bristol Port, and today the website BuzzFeed revealed that the Bristol Port Company donated £25,000 to Boris Johnson just 6 weeks ago. Jeremy Hunt, also a fan of the idea, he's actually been to the port during this campaign. He's had a 20-year relationship with it. He's also received £25,000 in donation from the Bristol Port Company. We've been in contact with the teams for both candidates today. Neither have responded to us so far.
Thanks, Paul. Is it all over bar the shouting? Will a Liberal scattering of cheesy photocalls, more hustings and a couple of TV events make any difference to the battle for number 10? That the BBC learned that Downing Street tried to withhold sensitive intelligence from Johnson when he became Foreign Secretary may not cut any ice with his diehard supporters. Maybe nothing would now. Tonight we'll be discussing what that will mean for the country. But first, David Grossman has been out and about among the faithful.
The latest city the Conservative leadership candidates must conquer on their way to Downing Street. York is not only an island of Remain in a sea of Brexit enthusiasm, but York Central is the only constituency in North Yorkshire not to return a Conservative MP. York has long been an important power base. Constantine the Great was declared Roman Emperor here. Under his statue, I met Sue Pascoe on her way to the hustings. Sue was an unsuccessful Conservative candidate for the European elections.
I think it's absolutely essential that we focus on the big things that will change our economy. If we don't get Brexit done, we are going to really mess up our society, and we've got to get that done, and we've got to get it done quickly.
And is that the number one issue on your list in terms of picking the next leader?
Absolutely. First, second and third, to be honest.
First, second and third, right.
And I see Boris as being inspirational and somebody who will lead a cabinet and lead a country through to Brexit.
There's one street in York that no politician should risk being photographed in. Guiding the country out of the current Brexit shambles is only one job on the Prime Ministerial to-do list. A bit further on my way to the hustings, I met Paul Doughty, one of only 2 remaining Conservative councillors in York.
Well, I'm pretty much set in my mind that I'll be supporting Boris Johnson, but you know, I'm hoping to hear what both candidates were going to do for York and the North specifically. So I'd be interested to hear on that.
But is there anything that Jeremy Hunt could say tonight to change your mind, do you think?
I'd be surprised.
And so to the hustings themselves, and for the first time I come face to face with some Jeremy Hunt supporters.
Has to be Hunt.
Ryan Stevenson is a city councillor in Leeds.
What would you say your primary motivation is? Is it a positive vote for Jeremy Hunt or a vote against Boris Johnson?
Well, interestingly enough, by instinct, I was a Boris Johnson supporter. I changed my mind this weekend after Jeremy Hunt declared his 10-point Brexit plan. So I'm actually a switcher, and I'm firmly behind Jeremy Hunt now.
What is it that you don't like about what Boris Johnson is suggesting?
It's not necessarily what I don't like, we've got 2 strong candidates. It's just that I think Jeremy Hunt's the better candidate who can actually get on and deliver Brexit.
In the lobby of the hustings auditorium, the mood is more pre-theatre chit-chat than political cut and thrust. Yes, the rival camps have set out their stalls, but it's all very restrained.
It's not clear how much impact an event like tonight's will have. But one thing is clear, many of the people here have already got their ballot papers. They'll be voting over the next couple of days. After the weekend, the die may very well be cast. It won't be possible for them to change their minds.
So how much will today's row about security clearance move the needle?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Johnson.
As Boris Johnson arrived in Darlington, he was asked the question.
Can I ask, were you blocked from seeing any intelligence when you were Foreign Secretary, Mr. Johnson? No?
A shake of the head is all we got. And even his rival, the current Foreign Secretary, was reluctant to engage with the subject.
We do have a rule that we never comment on intelligence matters, and that would include...
You're seeing everything.
And that would include comments about my predecessor and comments about myself. And I just say this, we have the finest intelligence services in the world in this country, but that does depend on some discretion by the Foreign Secretary, so I'm not going to breach that now.
And so another battle in the great Conservative leadership war is over. Believe it or not, we have another 7 hustings to go over the next 11 days. In all probability, none of them will make any difference to anyone.
David Grossman, well, what would their respective premierships look like? Is there a brand of conservatism into which they fit? Well, both candidates have spent the week strafing the country with policy promises, well, sort of, from Jeremy Hunt offering a free vote and lifting fox hunting bans in England and Wales, then opining the law wasn't really going to change, to Boris Johnson tonight in an interview with the Daily Mail promising to bring back stop and search, make offenders serve their full sentences, and offering to look at an amnesty for illegal immigrants who've been here for 15 years. Does any of it matter? Is the only thing that matters Brexit? Well, I'm joined by the former Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary and Secretary of State for Scotland, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, and the former advisor to David Cameron, Laura Trott, and the Daily Telegraph's assistant editor, Christopher Hope. Good evening to you, all of you. First of all, Malcolm Rifkind, right now, would it matter one bit if Boris Johnson couldn't keep a state secret?
Well, I think the story that was running earlier today, I find unconvincing, frankly, because the argument is that 2 days after he was made Foreign Secretary, Number 10 was trying to stop him getting access to intelligence. Now, if that was a problem, Theresa May wouldn't have appointed him in the first place. You don't appoint a Foreign Secretary when you simultaneously believe he shouldn't be given access to intelligence.
But you might need him in the tent rather than making trouble on the back benches.
Then you appoint him to another job in the cabinet. Right. It would be the easiest thing in the world. So, frankly, there may have been some over-eager beaver in number 10, but I'm pretty certain the Prime Minister wasn't involved.
Well, I was going to say, if you'd been Prime Minister and you'd put Boris at
we're into fantasy land now, are we?
Well, yes, but if you had been Prime Minister and you had put Boris at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which may be a further fantasy, would you have been able to trust him, do you think?
Well, I'd have been able to trust him in the sense of seeking to represent British interests. I think my problem with Boris isn't Trump. Boris is a highly intelligent guy. But I think my main anxiety is that I served Margaret Thatcher and John Major in the cabinet. And they didn't have much in common. But one of the things they did have in common was they both could deal with the hard grind of knowing the detail of what's going on in every department you are ultimately, as Prime Minister, responsible for. There's no other job like it. And I was impressed by Jeremy Hunt, 6 years in the Health Department, as well as 2 years as Foreign Secretary.
And you are supporting him, of course.
I am supporting him, but that's why I'm supporting him. Because I don't know him that well. But I know that he could handle the job. Boris would do his best, but I was disappointed with him at the Foreign Office, because that was a great opportunity to show that he'd become some kind of statesman. And he hasn't yet demonstrated that.
And in fact, the Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, although it's been brushed off, was a key moment because, you know, careless talk costs lives.
If it was a key moment, it was only because it was one of a history of similar difficult remarks. And I think part of Boris's problem, he's a brilliant journalist, he's a highly intelligent guy. He's not a fool, he's not stupid, he's not vulgar, he's very civilized, but he's still, forgive me putting it this way, he's still a journalist. He thinks in terms of headlines, and he does very funny remarks which entertain us all. Maybe he could be a good Prime Minister. I'm just not yet seeing the qualities that I've seen in previous Prime Ministers and which the country needs.
But what if he is essentially, you know, the figurehead, you know, the mascot, and he puts smart people around him?
We can't afford to have mascots. I read somebody saying he'd be an excellent non-executive chairman, as if, you know, Britain's doing so brilliantly well, all we need is a non-executive chairman. Well, frankly, no. Whoever is Prime Minister has to be in charge, and leadership means leadership. It means knowing what's going on in every department, understanding the detail, not just getting away with a flip comment.
But what do you get about this, as I call it, strafing with the idea of policies? Another set will probably go into them in more detail in the Mail tonight.
I think they're both mistaken in doing that. I don't have time for what either Jeremy Hunt or Boris Johnson are saying, because, first of all, we don't have a presidential system. For them to implement even one of these policies, they'd have to get the approval of the cabinet. And that's not always given. I remember Margaret Thatcher being defeated in cabinet on some ideas that she had.
It's not as if you've got a massive majority.
Well, in any event, the public aren't going to... There's two issues that are relevant. One is Brexit, where what they're both saying is...
And is Brexit the only thing that really matters?
No, it's not the only thing that really matters. It's a hugely important one, and what they're each saying is not that different, although there's a difference between October the 31st being the very final date, or maybe it running a little bit longer. That's about the only thing I can see. The second point, though, which is in a sense much more important, we are about to see a new Prime Minister who will be likely, unless there's a disaster, to be Prime Minister, head of the government for 2 or 3 years, covering a whole range of issues.
And is there anything you've learned about Boris Johnson through this campaign you didn't know before?
I think he is trying hard to put forward a case for why he could handle the job. I've no doubt that in some respects, he'd be an excellent campaigner. He has a charisma.
Campaigner, journalist, PR man.
These are important in politics. I mean, I'm not going to suggest they're irrelevant. I'm simply saying they're not enough. No. Because ultimately, we want somebody who's going to be the prime spokesman of this country, both at home and abroad, and will be able to do that.
You're backing Jeremy Hunt. Why should Remainers back Jeremy Hunt?
Well, I'm not sure whether the question of whether you're a Remainer or not makes any difference at this moment in time, because both of the candidates genuinely believe, I'm sure of this, that Britain, as I do, I voted Remain, but I equally accept that we should be leaving the European Union because that's what the referendum concluded.
But is Boris Johnson the man to bring the Faragists back more than Jeremy Hunt is?
I don't think that's as much of an issue, unless you're expecting to have a general election in the next 30 days or the next 2 months. We're not going to have a general election in that sort of period. The one thing that unites the Conservative Party, including the parliament parliamentary party, I don't think there's a single member of Parliament who wants an early general election. So it will only happen if Boris Johnson, if he was Prime Minister, was foolish enough to allow Labour to put down a motion of no confidence on the issue of leaving with no deal. Then you might get a split in the Conservative Party.
If I was to press you on this, just finally, one thing about Boris Johnson you think that makes him unfit, as far as you're concerned, to lead the country?
I wouldn't myself say there's anything that makes him unfit. That's a very strong condemnation. The question we're being asked to choose is who actually has already demonstrated the skills to handle the complexity, the drudgery, the detail of government, not just in the next few weeks, but over several years.
Malcolm, thank you very much indeed. Malcolm Rifkin there, Christopher Hope and Laura Trott with me now. Good evening. You've had your ear to every single hustings.
Yes.
And tonight in Scotland, a bit of activity.
He's got a shoeing, as I might say, north of the border. He got a real hard time in Scotland tonight. Fascinating. I mean, about they went to the heart of his personality. They were talking of, are you a fibber? The bus came up, the bus number. His private life was asked, and he refused to answer about his private life, as he always does.
Character.
Character, yeah. And he's really got quite a hard time in Scotland, and I think that's so interesting because it's so important to bring the whole union together if he wins.
Two big figures, Laura. Have you learned anything about what Johnsonism is and Huntism is?
You've got to be very careful saying Huntism. But yeah, I think with Boris, he has set out what is quite a clear agenda for him. I think there is a socially liberal piece and an economically liberal piece as well. With Jeremy, I think it's more of a mixed bag. I mean, you've seen some policies...
Socially illiberal?
To a certain extent. The abortion thing, I think, was a problem, especially for a lot of female MPs that I've spoken to. However, there are some pieces that seem a bit random, to be honest.
Let's talk about some of these random pieces. Let's say the Daily Mail front page tomorrow is got an interview with Boris Johnson and war on soft justice. And what he's talking about, of course, is his time at London Mayor. When they picked up a lot of knife crime, he wants to go back to that. He wants a possible amnesty for illegal immigrants up into 15 years. How we know that it's up into 15 years, I'm not very sure. Let's have a look at these quotes. I really, in a society, going to go around telling people who put down roots, who have children, who might have grandchildren, I'm sorry you're going home because of the circumstance in which you came. Christopher.
Well, he's socially liberal. I mean, his idea is control, taking back control over immigration. There's nothing to say he's going to end it. He's saying that we have control. We are the MPs who can control immigration. That's his point. So that is totally consistent with where he sits.
He's consistent because he's not been against immigration.
Right. And also, you know about his history. His family come from Turkey and the rest. So.
But then you've got a situation where what he's saying is, you will stay in prison for violent crime for the duration of your sentence. Now, the implications are that, how many more prisons are we going to have, and so forth. And is it, as the Mail's suggesting, on the back of the fact that his partner was a war boys victim?
Yes, I think with these two announcements, you have the best and the worst of Boris in all in one thing. I mean, it's a bold offer, especially running to be Conservative Prime Minister. The fact that you are saying have an amnesty for illegal immigrants, it's a good thing, I think, in many cases for kind of the modernising image of the party. And this kind of carries law of saying you're going to keep violent and sexual offenders in for the full terms is a bold piece, but it's where's the detail. I mean, this is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, all that fiscal headroom.
Yeah, exactly. The 27 billion that he spent, several times over, it is a problem. So I think it's the two sides of him coming into conflict with this story.
Where do you think we are? Do you think it is obviously you heard this on all the stuff coming tonight, and you're going to be watching more hustings.
Well, it's in Darlington and York.
Do you think it's in the bag?
I don't think it is in the bag. I think in a two-horse race, they always narrow as you get towards the end. Look at the Brexit vote and how close that was. And I just think with Scotland, and you were saying earlier that, maybe 20% of the members are now in Scotland because of the Ruth Davidson surge. And what do they think?
Our feelings about Boris Johnson very plain.
Yes, not a fan, and supported, Sajid Javid, Michael Gove.
I'm interested in what Malcolm Rifkin was saying there about whether Boris Johnson could do the graft. And that is an issue for voters. It's an issue for people in their everyday lives, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, when seeing day to day what David Cameron had to do, and when you are in front of these select committees and public appearances and press conferences that you have to do, where people's lives are genuinely on the line every single day, I think that is the thing. And with the situation in Iran, with the select committee that he had, with Nazanin being in jail, it is a worry, and that's where the chairman point doesn't work.
Chairman point doesn't matter, but that is clear that what he would do is he's going to surround himself by clever
with good people.
Yeah.
I've heard more of a player-manager, but certainly on the field. David Cameron always said he loved PMQs. It meant you had to revise about the whole government all the time. So you can't be a chairman. You've got to know what's happening in all parts of government at the same time. Very difficult for him.
David Cameron must look back now, or be looking forward at this, going, where are all these policies? They've absolutely put them all together and set a match to them.
I mean, the slightly ridiculous thing about this whole situation is that we have a majority of 4, which is probably soon going to be 2.
3.
So, yeah, so how anyone's going to get these things through is a very important point.
So is this a chimera? Is this a problem?
The point about Boris Johnson is, I've been with the grassroots the past 2 days, and that's only 2 days. They want to be cheered up. They want to have enthusiasm. They want to believe in someone. You're not sure like Kirsty.
Apple pie.
Well, they want something. They want something. They just want to lift their eyes to the horizon. If they voted for Brexit, they want to see what the idea was. And this guy, of the 2 candidates, he is totally, personally invested in Brexit in a way that Jeremy Hunt is trying to deliver something that he knows he didn't vote for.
Thank you all very much indeed.